They uncovered her in public, and the commander was frozen by the spine tattoo. The summer heat was unbearable that Tuesday afternoon, when Sarah Martinez decided to take her lunch break at the small park near the military base. She worked as a translator for the government, spending most of her days buried in paperwork and classified documents. The fresh air and shade of the old oak trees seemed like paradise compared to her stuffy office. Sarah chose a bench facing the fountain and unwrapped her sandwich. She was wearing a light blue sundress that day, something she rarely did. Usually she preferred conservative blouses and pants for work, but the weather had been so hot lately that she decided to dress more comfortably. The dress had thin straps and a low back, which felt wonderfully cool in the breeze. As she ate, Sarah noticed she wasn't alone in the park. Several people were enjoying their lunch breaks, too. There was an elderly man feeding pigeons, a young mother pushing her toddler on the swings, and a group of office workers sharing stories under a nearby tree. Everything felt peaceful and normal. What Sarah didn't notice was the small crowd that had begun to gather behind her bench. It started with just one person, then two, then more. They weren't being obvious about it, but they were definitely looking at something with great interest. Some were whispering to each other, others were pointing discreetly. The thing that caught everyone's attention was Sarah's back. The low-cut dress revealed something that most people had never seen before, something that made them stop in their tracks. Across Sarah's shoulder blades and down her spine was an intricate tattoo that seemed to tell a story of its own. The tattoo was unlike anything the onlookers had ever seen. It wasn't a simple design or a decorative pattern. Instead, it appeared to be a detailed map of some kind with lines, symbols, and what looked like coordinates. The artwork was incredibly precise, done in black ink with some parts highlighted in deep blue. At the top, near her neck, there was a symbol that looked military in nature, resembling an eagle with spread wings. Mrs. Chen, who ran the flower shop across the street, was the first to really study the tattoo closely. She had stepped out to water her plants when she noticed the crowd. Being curious by nature, she moved closer to see what was so interesting. When she saw Sarah's back, she gasped quietly. The symbol at the top of the tattoo looked exactly like something she had seen years ago when her late husband worked at the base. "That's impossible," she whispered to herself, but she couldn't look away. Meanwhile, Sarah continued eating her lunch, completely unaware of the attention she was attracting. She was lost in thought, thinking about the strange phone call she had received that morning. Someone with a deep voice had called her office, asking about documents from 20 years ago. When she told him she didn't have access to files that old, he had hung up without another word. It had been bothering her all day. The crowd behind her continued to grow. A mailman had stopped his route to look. 2 teenagers on skateboards had paused their ride. Even the elderly man feeding pigeons had forgotten about the birds and was staring in Sarah's direction. None of them wanted to be rude and approach her directly, but they couldn't help themselves from looking. The most interesting thing about the tattoo was how detailed it was. If someone looked closely, they could see tiny numbers and letters scattered throughout the design. There were also small drawings that looked like buildings or landmarks. The whole thing seemed to cover most of Sarah's upper back, disappearing under the dress at her lower back. Dr. Williams, a retired history professor who was reading on a nearby bench, adjusted his glasses and studied the tattoo more carefully. He had spent his career studying military history and ancient symbols. What he was seeing on this young woman's back made his heart race. Some of those symbols were definitely military codes, but they were old ones, the kind that hadn't been used in decades. As Sarah finished her sandwich and reached for her water bottle, she finally sensed that something was different. The park had become unusually quiet, and she had that feeling people get when they know they're being watched. She turned around slowly and was shocked to see more than a dozen people standing behind her bench, all looking in her direction. Her face turned red with embarrassment. "Is everything okay?" she asked, standing up quickly and trying to adjust her dress. The crowd suddenly realized how obvious they had been and started to scatter, looking embarrassed themselves. Most people mumbled apologies and walked away quickly, but Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her face full of concern. "Dear, that tattoo on your back," she said gently. "Where did you get it?" Sarah touched her shoulder self-consciously. "Oh, this old thing. I've had it for years." "Why do you ask?" "It's just that some of those symbols look familiar to me. My husband used to work at the military base here before he passed away. He showed me some similar markings once in his old papers. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm day. She had gotten the tattoo when she was 18, right before starting college. It had been an impulsive decision, something she did with her best friend who was getting a small butterfly on her ankle. But Sarah had chosen something much more complex and meaningful to her. The tattoo was a copy of a drawing she had found in her grandfather's belongings after he died. He had been in the military, though he never talked much about his service. She had always assumed it was just an artistic design he had made, maybe a map of somewhere he had been stationed. Getting it tattooed had been her way of honoring his memory. I never really knew what all the symbols meant, Sarah admitted to Mrs. Chen. It was based on something that belonged to my grandfather. Mrs. Chen nodded thoughtfully. What was your grandfather's name, if you don't mind me asking? Captain James Rodriguez. He served in the army for most of his life, but he died when I was pretty young. The color drained from Mrs. Chen's face. She had definitely heard that name before, but she couldn't remember exactly where. All she knew was that it was connected to something important, something that her husband had mentioned years ago with great seriousness. As Sarah gathered her things to head back to work, she couldn't shake the feeling that this day had changed something. The way people had stared at her tattoo, the questions from Mrs. Chen, and that strange phone call from the morning all seemed connected somehow. She just couldn't figure out how. Commander David Hayes was having the worst day of his career when his phone buzzed with an urgent message. He had been dealing with a security breach at the base all morning, trying to track down some missing classified files that had somehow disappeared from the archives. The last thing he needed was another problem to solve. The text message was from his old friend Marcus, who worked as a security guard at the government building downtown. Dave, you need to see this photo. Call me ASAP. Attached was a blurry picture that looked like it had been taken from far away. Commander Hayes squinted at his phone screen, trying to make sense of the image. It appeared to be a photo of someone's back, showing what looked like a detailed tattoo. He was about to delete it, thinking Marcus was wasting his time, when something in the design caught his eye. His blood went cold. He immediately called Marcus back. Where did you get this photo? He demanded without even saying hello. My wife took it at the park during her lunch break, Marcus replied. She said there was a big crowd of people looking at some woman's tattoo. Thought it might be gang-related or something, so she snapped a quick picture to show me later. But Dave, when I looked at it closely, I recognized some of those symbols. Commander Hayes was already heading to his car. What symbols? The ones from Operation Silent Thunder. Remember those classified maps your father used to work on? The ones that were supposedly destroyed after the mission ended? The phone almost slipped from Commander Hayes' hands. Operation Silent Thunder was something he wasn't supposed to know about. But his father had been the commanding officer for that mission back in 1985. It was one of the most classified operations in military history, and according to official records, all documents related to it had been destroyed years ago. That's impossible, Marcus. Those documents were burned. I was there when my father supervised the destruction personally. I know what I'm looking at, Dave. That tattoo has the exact same symbols and layout as those old maps. Someone either has access to copies that weren't destroyed, or they know a lot more about Silent Thunder than they should. Commander Hayes was already speeding toward downtown. Do you know who the woman is? Not yet, but I can find out. She was in the park near the government building, so she probably works around here. I'll check the security cameras and see if I can track her down. As Commander Hayes drove, his mind raced back to his childhood. His father, General Robert Hayes, had been a stern man who rarely talked about his work. But Commander Hayes remembered one night when he was 12 years old. He had walked into his father's study and found him burning papers in a metal trash can. The general had quickly put out the fire and never explained what he was doing. But the young boy had caught a glimpse of maps and symbols that looked incredibly important. Years later, when Commander Hayes joined the military himself, he had tried to learn more about his father's work, but Operation Silent Thunder was buried so deep in classified records that even with his high security clearance, he couldn't access the files. All he knew was that it had something to do with a covert mission in Central America, and that it had ended badly. When he arrived at the government building, Marcus was waiting for him with a laptop full of security footage. They spent an hour going through different camera angles until they found clear images of the woman from the park. There, Marcus pointed at the screen. That's her, Sarah Martinez. She works as a translator on the third floor. Commander Hayes studied the woman's face. She looked to be in her late 20s with long dark hair and kind eyes. She seemed completely ordinary, not like someone who would be involved in military secrets or espionage. But the tattoo on her back told a different story. "I need to see that tattoo up close," Commander Hayes said. "Can you arrange a meeting?" "That might be tricky. I can't just walk up to someone and ask them to show me their tattoo. Maybe we could—" "No," Commander Hayes interrupted. "This needs to be handled carefully. If she really has classified information tattooed on her body, we need to know how she got it and who else might know about it." They decided that Marcus would casually approach Sarah the next day and strike up a conversation, hoping to learn more about the tattoo's origin. Meanwhile, Commander Hayes would try to dig up whatever information he could about Operation Silent Thunder, using his contacts in military intelligence. That evening, Commander Hayes called his mother. General Hayes had died 5 years earlier, but his widow might remember something about the operation that could help. "Mom, I need to ask you about Dad's work, specifically about something called Operation Silent Thunder." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "David, you know your father never talked about his classified work." "This is important, Mom. I think someone might have information about that operation that they shouldn't have." "Did Dad ever mention anyone named Rodriguez?" "Captain James Rodriguez." Another pause, even longer this time. "James Rodriguez," she repeated slowly. "Yes, I remember that name. He worked with your father on something very secret." "But David, James died years ago." "Why are you asking about this?" "His granddaughter might have information that was supposed to be destroyed." "Did Dad ever say what happened to Captain Rodriguez?" "It was very sad," his mother said quietly. "James had some kind of accident during the mission. Your father blamed himself for what happened. He used to have nightmares about it for years afterward." Commander Hayes felt his heart sinking. If Captain Rodriguez had died during Operation Silent Thunder, and if his granddaughter somehow had classified information about the mission, it meant there were secrets that had been hidden for decades. "Mom, did Dad keep any personal records about the operation? Anything that wasn't destroyed with the official files?" "I don't know, sweetheart. After he died, I packed up his office and put everything in storage. I never looked through it all. There were boxes and boxes of papers and photographs." Commander Hayes realized he needed to go through his father's personal effects, something he had been avoiding since the funeral. If there were answers to be found, they might be hidden in those stored boxes. The next morning, he met Marcus early before work started. They had developed a plan to approach Sarah Martinez carefully, without alarming her or making her suspicious. "Remember," Commander Hayes told his friend, "we don't know if she's involved in something dangerous or if she's just an innocent person who happened to inherit something she shouldn't have. Either way, we need to be very careful how we handle this." As they walked into the government building, both men felt the weight of what they might be about to uncover. Secrets had a way of staying buried until someone accidentally dug them up, and sometimes once they were exposed, there was no way to put them back in the ground. Sarah couldn't concentrate on her work the next morning. Every translation document on her desk seemed to blur together as she kept thinking about what had happened in the park. The way Mrs. Chen had looked at her tattoo with such recognition and concern made her feel like she was missing something important about her own body. During her coffee break, she decided to do something she had never done before. She went into the women's restroom and used her phone to take a picture of her tattoo in the mirror. It was awkward and she couldn't get a perfect angle, but she managed to capture most of the design. Looking at it on her phone screen, Sarah realized she had never really studied the tattoo carefully since getting it 10 years ago. She had gotten so used to it being there that she barely noticed it anymore. But now, seeing it in the photograph, she could make out details that she had forgotten about. There were definitely numbers scattered throughout the design. She could see what looked like coordinates, 15° and 87° were near the bottom, and Operation ST written in tiny letters near her left shoulder blade. There were also small drawings that she had always thought were decorative, but now they looked more like actual places or landmarks. ST could stand for Silent Thunder, she whispered to herself, then immediately felt silly for talking out loud in an empty bathroom. When she returned to her desk, Sarah found a man she didn't recognize waiting near her cubicle. He was tall and friendly looking, wearing a security guard uniform with a name tag that read, Marcus. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Martinez?" he asked with a warm smile. "Yes, that's me. Is everything okay?" Oh, everything's fine. I just wanted to apologize for what happened yesterday in the park. My wife was part of that crowd of people who were staring at you, and she felt terrible about it afterward. She asked me to find you and say sorry for being so rude. Sarah felt relieved. That's very kind of you, but really it's okay. I was just surprised by all the attention. Marcus nodded understandingly. She said something about your tattoo reminding her of symbols she'd seen before. She's really interested in military history, always reading books about old operations and codes. She gets excited when she sees anything that looks historical. Something about the way he said old operations made Sarah's heart skip a beat. Did she say which symbols looked familiar? Not specifically, but she mentioned they looked like the kind of thing you'd see on military maps from the 1980s. Her father was in the army back then, so she grew up seeing that kind of thing around the house. Sarah's hands started to tremble slightly. The 1980s was exactly when her grandfather had been most active in his military service. Would your wife maybe want to meet me? I'd love to learn more about what she recognized. Marcus seemed pleased by this suggestion. I'm sure she would. In fact, I have a friend who's really knowledgeable about military history. He might be able to help identify some of the symbols too if you're interested. They arranged to meet after work at a small cafe downtown. Marcus gave Sarah his phone number and promised to bring his wife and his military friend to look at the tattoo more closely. After Marcus left, Sarah couldn't focus on work at all. She kept staring at the phone number he had given her, wondering if she was making a mistake by getting involved with strangers. But her curiosity was stronger than her caution. She had lived with this tattoo for 10 years without really knowing what it meant, and now she might finally get some answers. At lunch, instead of going to the park, Sarah drove to the public library. She went to the reference section and asked the librarian to help her find information about military operations in Central America during the 1980s. That's a pretty broad topic, the librarian said. Are you looking for anything specific? Maybe something called Operation Silent Thunder. The librarian searched the computer database for several minutes, then shook her head. I'm not finding anything with that exact name. There were several operations in that region during that time period, but most of the detailed information is still classified. You might have better luck with the military archives, but you'd need special permission to access those records. Crying spent the rest of her lunch break reading general information about Central American operations in the 1980s. She learned that there had been a lot of covert missions in countries like Honduras, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. Many of these operations had involved small teams of soldiers who worked with local contacts to gather intelligence or support friendly governments. The coordinates she had noticed on her tattoo, 15°87°, were in Honduras. When she looked up that exact location on an online map, it appeared to be in a remote mountainous area near the border with Nicaragua. There was nothing there according to the satellite images, just jungle and a few dirt roads. That evening, Sarah met Marcus, his wife Linda, and Commander Hayes at the cafe. She had been expecting someone in uniform, but the commander was wearing civilian clothes and introduced himself simply as Dave, Marcus's friend who was interested in military history. I really appreciate you meeting with us, Commander Hayes said as they sat down with their coffee. Marcus told me you have a tattoo with some interesting military symbols on it. Sarah suddenly felt nervous. These people seemed nice, but she was about to show her tattoo to complete strangers. I should probably mention that the tattoo is on my back, so I'll need to find somewhere private to show you. Linda, Marcus's wife, smiled reassuringly. We could step into the restroom if that would be more comfortable for you. I promise we're not trying to be inappropriate. We're just really curious about military history. They found an empty meeting room in the back of the cafe where Sarah could lift up her shirt and show them the tattoo. The moment Commander Hayes saw it, his face went completely white. He staggered backward and had to grab a chair to steady himself. Dave, are you okay? Marcus asked with concern. Commander Hayes couldn't speak for a moment. He was staring at the tattoo like he had seen a ghost. The symbols, the coordinates, the tiny drawings, everything matched perfectly with his childhood memories of his father's secret papers. Where exactly did you get this design? He finally managed to ask. Sarah explained about finding the drawing in her grandfather's belongings, about getting the tattoo as a teenager to honor his memory, and about never really understanding what it meant. What was your grandfather's full name and rank? Commander Hayes asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Captain James Rodriguez. He died when I was 8 years old. Commander Hayes closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Captain James Rodriguez had been his father's closest friend and most trusted officer. He had also been the soldier who died during Operation Silent Thunder, the mission that had haunted General Hayes for the rest of his life. "Sarah," Commander Hayes said carefully, "I think your grandfather left you more than just a tattoo. He left you a map to something that was supposed to stay hidden forever." The silence in the small meeting room felt heavy as Commander Hayes processed what he had just discovered. Sarah watched his face change from shock to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. She had expected him to be interested in her tattoo, but his reaction was far more intense than she had imagined. "I think I need to tell you the truth about who I am," Commander Hayes said finally. "My name is David Hayes and I'm a commander at the military base here. Your grandfather James Rodriguez served under my father, General Robert Hayes, during Operation Silent Thunder." Sarah felt the room spinning slightly. "Operation Silent Thunder? That's what's written on my tattoo." "Yes, it is. And according to everything I was told, all records of that operation were destroyed 30 years ago. But apparently your grandfather kept a copy." Marcus and Linda exchanged worried glances. They had expected to help identify some historical symbols, not to stumble into a decades-old military secret. Commander Hayes continued. "The operation took place in Honduras in 1985. It was supposed to be a simple intelligence mission, but something went terribly wrong. My father never talked about it, but I know that Captain Rodriguez died during the mission and it haunted my father for the rest of his life." Sarah sat down heavily in one of the chairs. "My grandfather died in a car accident when I got home from his deployment. At least that's what my family always told me." "I'm sorry, Sarah, but that's not true. Captain Rodriguez died in the jungle in Honduras and his body was never recovered. The car accident story was created to protect his family and to keep the operation secret." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her entire understanding of her grandfather's death had been a lie. She had grown up believing he died in a tragic accident on his way home from work, not that he had died on a dangerous mission in a foreign country. "Why would they lie to us?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Because Operation Silent Thunder was completely off the books. Officially, it never happened. The soldiers who participated were told never to speak about it, and the families of anyone who died were given cover stories to protect national security." Commander Hayes pulled out his phone and showed Sarah a photograph he had taken that morning. It was a picture of his father in military dress uniform, standing next to another soldier who looked remarkably like an older version of Sarah. "That's your grandfather," he said gently. "This photo was taken just before they left for Honduras." Sarah stared at the image, seeing her own eyes and nose reflected in her grandfather's face. She had so few pictures of him, and she had never seen him in uniform before. He looked young and confident with no idea of what was waiting for him in the jungle. "What was the mission supposed to accomplish?" she asked. Commander Hayes hesitated. "I only know pieces of the story. There was a group of American hostages being held by rebels in the mountains of Honduras. The local government couldn't rescue them without causing an international incident, so our military sent in a small covert team to extract them quietly. And something went wrong. Very wrong. The team was ambushed. Some of the soldiers made it out, but others, including your grandfather, were killed. The hostages were never recovered either." Sarah looked down at her hands, trying to process everything she was learning. "So this tattoo, it's actually a map of where the mission took place?" "I believe so. These coordinates here," Commander Hayes pointed to the numbers on Sarah's back. "They marked the location where the team was supposed to extract the hostages, and these symbols probably indicate safe houses, landing zones, and enemy positions that were known at the time." Linda, who had been quiet during the conversation, finally spoke up. "But why would Captain Rodriguez keep a copy of classified information? Wasn't that against military law?" Commander Hayes nodded. "Absolutely. But I think I know why he did it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My father spent years trying to get permission to launch a recovery mission to bring back the bodies of the soldiers who died. He believed they deserved a proper burial, but the government refused every request, saying it was too dangerous and would compromise other operations in the region. So my grandfather kept the map in case someone ever wanted to go back," Sarah said, understanding dawning on her face. "I think so. And I think he hid it in the one place where it would be safe but where someone in his family might eventually find it. His personal belongings." Marcus, who had been listening to everything with growing amazement, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "So what happens now?" Do you report this to your superiors? Commander Hayes looked troubled. That's complicated. Officially, I should report the existence of classified information that wasn't properly destroyed. But Sarah isn't a security threat. She's the granddaughter of a hero who died serving his country. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. All her life she had known her grandfather was a good man, but she had never known he was actually a hero who died trying to save other people. There's something else, Commander Hayes continued. Yesterday morning, someone called Sarah's office asking about documents from 20 years ago. Sarah, did the caller ask about anything specific? Sarah's eyes widened. No, they just asked if I had access to old files. When I said I didn't, they hung up. You think that call was connected to this? I think someone else knows about your tattoo, or at least suspects you have information about Operation Silent Thunder. The timing is too much of a coincidence. The group sat in worried silence for a moment. If someone else was looking for information about the classified operation, Sarah might be in danger. What should I do? Sarah asked. Commander Hayes thought for a moment. First, you should be very careful about who you trust and where you go alone. If someone is trying to get information about Silent Thunder, they might see you as a target. Second, he continued, I think we need to learn more about what really happened during the mission. My father's personal papers are in storage, and there might be information there that could help us understand why someone would be interested in this operation after all these years. Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. I want to help. If my grandfather died trying to save people, and if his body is still out there somewhere, I want to do whatever I can to honor his memory. Commander Hayes looked at her with respect. It could be dangerous, Sarah. We don't know who else is looking for this information or what they're planning to do with it. I understand that. But for 10 years, I've been walking around with my grandfather's final message tattooed on my back without even knowing it. I think it's time I learned what he was trying to tell me. The storage facility was located in an industrial part of town that Sarah had never visited before. Commander Hayes had picked her up early Saturday morning, and they drove through empty streets as the sun was just beginning to rise. Sarah had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with questions about her grandfather and the dangerous secret she had been carrying on her back for 10 years. Are you sure you want to do this? Commander Hayes asked as they pulled into the parking lot. Once we start digging into this, there might not be a way to go back to your normal life. Sarah looked at her reflection in the passenger window. My normal life was built on a lie about how my grandfather died. I think it's time I learned the truth. The storage unit was filled with boxes, furniture, and military memorabilia that had belonged to General Hayes. Sarah felt like she was walking into a museum of someone else's life. There were uniforms, medals, photographs, and stacks of documents that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Commander Hayes opened a box labeled Personal Correspondence 1980-1990 and began carefully going through the contents. Sarah started with another box marked Honduras Files that made her heart beat faster just reading the label. Dave, look at this, Sarah said, holding up a manila folder. Inside were photographs of soldiers in jungle camouflage, including several pictures of her grandfather. But these weren't posed military photos like the one Commander Hayes had shown her. These were candid shots of men preparing for a mission, checking weapons and studying maps. Commander Hayes took the folder and studied the images carefully. This is incredible. My father wasn't supposed to keep any of this. In one photograph, Sarah could see her grandfather pointing at something on a large map spread across a table. The map looked similar to the design of her tattoo with the same symbols and coordinate markings. There's a letter here, Sarah said, pulling out a handwritten note from the bottom of the folder. It's addressed to your father. Commander Hayes read the letter aloud. Robert, if something happens to me during Silent Thunder, I want you to make sure my family knows the truth someday. I'm keeping copies of the operational maps and intelligence reports hidden in my personal effects. My granddaughter Sarah is too young to understand now, but when she's older, she should know that her grandfather died trying to save innocent people, not in some random accident. The hostages are still out there, and someone needs to remember where to look for them. Your friend, James Rodriguez. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. Her grandfather had planned for this moment, knowing that someday she might need to learn the truth about his death and his final mission. Keep looking, Commander Hayes said softly. If he kept copies of everything, There might be more detailed information about the hostages and what happened during the mission. They spent the next 2 hours going through boxes, finding pieces of the puzzle that had been Operation Silent Thunder. There were radio transcripts, intelligence reports, and most importantly, detailed maps that showed not just where the mission had taken place, but where the bodies of the fallen soldiers might still be located. According to this, Commander Hayes said, studying a tactical report, the team was ambushed at coordinates 15°12 N, 87°18 W. That's about 5 miles from the main coordinates on your tattoo. Your grandfather and 2 other soldiers were separated from the group during the firefight. Sarah found a folder labeled Hostage Information that contained photographs and profiles of the 5 American civilians who had been kidnapped. There were 2 doctors working for a medical charity, a journalist, and 2 engineers who had been building water systems in remote villages. They were good people, she said, looking at their faces. They were just trying to help. And according to this intelligence report, they were still alive when the rescue mission began. But after the ambush, there was never any further contact. Commander Hayes found something that made him freeze. It was a sealed envelope with his own name written on it in his father's handwriting. "This is addressed to me," he said, his voice shaking slightly. He opened the envelope carefully and read the letter inside. As he read, his face went pale and his hands began to tremble. "What does it say?" Sarah asked with concern. "It's from my father. He wrote this letter shortly before he died, intending for me to find it someday." Commander Hayes sat down heavily on a storage crate. He says that the official report about Operation Silent Thunder was false. The mission wasn't a failure because of bad intelligence or enemy action. It failed because someone on the American side betrayed the team. Sarah felt a chill run through her. Someone gave away their position? According to this letter, my father suspected that there was a leak in the operation from the beginning. Someone with high-level access was feeding information to the enemy. The ambush was too well coordinated, too perfectly timed to be accidental. Commander Hayes continued reading. He says he spent years trying to investigate, but every time he got close to answers, his superiors shut down his inquiries. Eventually, he was told to drop the investigation or face court-martial for insubordination. So the mission was sabotaged and then it was covered up? It looks that way. And your grandfather knew about it. According to this letter, Captain Rodriguez suspected the same thing and was gathering evidence before the mission. He was planning to expose the traitor when he got back. Sarah realized the implications of what they were discovering. That's why someone called my office this week asking about old files. Someone knows that my grandfather had evidence about the betrayal. Commander Hayes nodded grimly. And if that someone is still alive and still in a position of power, they would do anything to make sure that evidence never comes to light. They found one more crucial piece of information in the last box they searched. It was a small notebook that had belonged to Captain Rodriguez, filled with his handwritten observations about the mission preparation. On the final page, he had written a name with a question mark next to it. Colonel Morrison? "Do you know who Colonel Morrison is?" Sarah asked. Commander Hayes's face went dark. "I know exactly who he is. Morrison is now General Morrison, and he's one of the highest-ranking officers in military intelligence. He's also been pushing for my early retirement for the past year, claiming that I'm not suitable for command." Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "You think he knows about my tattoo? I think he's always known about the evidence your grandfather kept. And I think he's been watching, waiting for it to surface. Your appearance in that park this week might have been exactly what he was waiting for." As they packed up the documents and photographs they had found, both Sarah and Commander Hayes realized that they were now in possession of information that could destroy careers and expose a decades-old conspiracy. But they also had evidence that could finally bring justice to the families of the soldiers who died, and possibly lead to the recovery of hostages who might still be alive. "What's our next step?" Sarah asked as they loaded the boxes into Commander Hayes's car. "We need to be very careful about who we trust. If General Morrison really is involved in the cover-up, then he has access to resources and people who could make us disappear just like the evidence was supposed to." Sarah thought about the strange phone call she had received, and about how many people had seen her tattoo in the park. "How many people do you think know about this?" "Too many," Commander Hayes replied. "But we have one advantage that your grandfather and my father didn't have." "What's that?" "We have proof. Not just suspicions or theories, but actual documents and photographs that show what really happened. And we have your tattoo, which is a permanent record that can't be destroyed or hidden away in some classified filing cabinet. As they drove back toward town, Sarah made a decision. I want to contact the families of the other soldiers who died. They deserve to know the truth about what happened to their loved ones. Commander Hayes nodded. I agree, but we need to be strategic about this. If we move too fast or contact too many people at once, Morrison will know we're onto him. Then we start with one family, someone we can trust who won't go to the authorities until we're ready. They spent the rest of the drive planning their next moves. They would research the other soldiers who had died during Operation Silent Thunder, find their surviving family members, and carefully reach out to them. They would also need to secure the evidence they had found, making copies and storing them in multiple safe locations. Most importantly, they would need to stay alive long enough to expose the truth. As Commander Hayes dropped Sarah off at her apartment, he handed her a secure phone. Use this to contact me from now on. Don't use your regular phone or email for anything related to this investigation. Sarah took the phone and looked at her apartment building, wondering if she would ever feel safe there again. Dave, do you really think we can pull this off? Do you think we can get justice for my grandfather and the others? Commander Hayes looked at her with determination. Your grandfather died believing that someone would eventually uncover the truth. He literally put his faith in you by hiding that map on your back. I think we owe it to him to see this through. As Sarah walked into her building, she touched her back where the tattoo was hidden under her shirt. For 10 years, she had carried her grandfather's final message without knowing it. Now she understood that it wasn't just a map of where he died. It was a map of how to find the truth, and she was going to follow it wherever it led. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of a congressional hearing room, her hands trembling as she prepared to lift her shirt and show the tattoo that had started everything. The room was packed with reporters, military officials, and family members of the soldiers who had died in Operation Silent Thunder. After weeks of careful planning and gathering allies, she and Commander Hayes had finally found a way to bring the truth to light. The breakthrough had come when they contacted Maria Gonzalez, the daughter of Sergeant Carlos Gonzalez, one of the other soldiers who had died in the mission. Maria worked as an investigative journalist for a major newspaper, and when she heard their story, she knew exactly how to get the evidence in front of people who could act on it. The first thing we need to do is get this out of military channels, Maria had told them during their first meeting. If General Morrison really has been covering this up for 30 years, then the military isn't going to investigate itself. We need to take this to Congress and the media at the same time. It had taken 2 weeks to arrange the hearing, during which Sarah had barely slept. She kept expecting General Morrison or his people to try to stop them, but aside from a few suspicious cars that seemed to follow her occasionally, nothing dramatic had happened. Commander Hayes suspected that Morrison was waiting to see what evidence they actually had before making any drastic moves. Now, sitting at the witness table, Sarah looked out at the crowded room and saw faces that had become familiar to her over the past few weeks. There was Mrs. Chen from the flower shop, who had been the first person to recognize the military symbols on her tattoo. Marcus and Linda were there, along with the families of all 5 soldiers who had died during the mission. Most importantly, in the front row, sat an elderly woman with tears in her eyes. Her name was Elena Rodriguez, and she was Sarah's grandmother. For 30 years, she had believed her husband died in a car accident. Learning the truth about his heroic death and seeing his granddaughter carry on his mission had been overwhelming for her. Congressman Bradley, who was chairing the hearing, called the session to order. We are here today to examine allegations of misconduct and cover-up related to a classified military operation known as Operation Silent Thunder, which took place in Honduras in 1985. He looked directly at Sarah. Ms. Martinez, you have come forward with evidence that suggests official reports about this operation were falsified. Can you explain to the committee how you came to possess this evidence? Sarah took a deep breath and began telling the story that had consumed her life for the past month. She explained about finding her grandfather's drawing, about getting the tattoo, about the day in the park when people recognized the military symbols, and about meeting Commander Hayes. The evidence I carry isn't just documents or photographs that could be destroyed or lost, she said. It's permanently recorded on my body, exactly as my grandfather intended. When she lifted her shirt to show the committee the detailed tattoo, The room fell completely silent. Photographers captured every angle of the intricate map, with its coordinates, symbols, and coded messages that told the story of a mission gone wrong. Commander Hayes was called to testify next. He presented all the documents and photographs they had found in his father's storage unit, including the letter that revealed his father's suspicions about a traitor within the operation. General Robert Hayes spent the last 20 years of his life trying to get permission to recover the bodies of the soldiers who died in Operation Silent Thunder. Commander Hayes testified. Every request was denied, every investigation was shut down, and every time he got close to the truth, he was threatened with court-martial. The most dramatic moment came when Maria Gonzalez presented evidence she had uncovered through her journalism contacts. She had tracked down 3 of the surviving soldiers from the original mission, men who had been ordered never to speak about what they had experienced. These men have lived with this secret for 30 years, Maria told the committee. They were told that speaking about Operation Silent Thunder would endanger national security and result in their imprisonment. But they're willing to break that silence now because they believe the families of their fallen comrades deserve the truth. One of the survivors, now a retired police officer named Robert Kim, testified that the mission had been compromised from the beginning. We knew something was wrong when we landed in Honduras, he said. The enemy was waiting for us at positions that were supposed to be secret. It was like they had a copy of our operational plan. The committee also heard from an expert in military intelligence who had analyzed the documents Sarah and Commander Hayes had found. Based on the evidence presented, it appears that someone with high-level access to the mission planning deliberately provided information to hostile forces. This wasn't a case of bad intelligence or operational failure. This was sabotage. General Morrison was called to testify, but he exercised his right to remain silent on the advice of his attorneys. His refusal to answer questions about his role in the operation and the subsequent cover-up spoke volumes to everyone in the room. The hearing lasted for 6 hours, but by the end, the truth about Operation Silent Thunder was finally out in the open. The 5 American hostages who had been kidnapped in 1985 were still officially listed as missing, and there was now renewed pressure to launch a recovery mission to find them and bring home the bodies of the soldiers who had died trying to save them. As Sarah left the hearing room, she was surrounded by reporters asking questions about her tattoo and her grandfather's legacy. But the most important moment came when Elena Rodriguez hugged her granddaughter tightly. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you," the elderly woman whispered. "He always said that the truth has a way of coming out eventually. He just never imagined it would be carried on his granddaughter's back." 6 months later, Sarah stood on a helicopter landing pad in Honduras, watching as a joint American-Honduran recovery team prepared to search the jungle coordinates that had been tattooed on her back for 10 years. Commander Hayes, who had been cleared of any wrongdoing and promoted for his role in exposing the truth, was leading the military side of the operation. The investigation into General Morrison had resulted in his court-martial and conviction for treason. Several other officers who had been involved in the cover-up had also been prosecuted. The families of the soldiers who died in Operation Silent Thunder had finally received the official recognition and honor their loved ones deserved. As the helicopter lifted off toward the coordinates 15 de Guerin, 87 de Grabio, Sarah touched her back where her grandfather's map was permanently etched into her skin. Captain James Rodriguez had died believing that someone would eventually follow the trail he had left behind. He had been right. The truth had been hidden for 30 years, but it had never been forgotten. It had been carried by his granddaughter, written in ink and determination, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. And when that moment came, it had changed everything. Sarah smiled as she watched the jungle canopy pass below them. Her grandfather's final mission was finally complete, and the secrets that had been buried in the darkness were being brought into the light. The tattoo on her back was no longer just a memorial to a fallen soldier. It was a testament to the power of truth and the courage it takes to uncover it. The spine tattoo that had frozen a commander with recognition had ultimately freed the truth that had been hidden for decades. And sometimes, that's exactly how justice works. One permanent mark at a time.